I'm Connie. Sitting in my office, looking at the front page headline New York couple charged with financial fraud and embezzlement, I felt a strange sense of calm. Their faces, once full of arrogance, were now plastered all over the newspaper, being dissected by the very media they used to impress. It all started on my 30th birthday. My parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, walked into my apartment like they owned the place. Dad had that smarmy grin that always preceded bad news, and Mom clutched a stack of papers, her eyes shining with a false sense of righteousness. They didn't even wish me a happy birthday. Instead, Dad plopped the papers on my table and said, "Good news. Thanks to you, we've secured your sister Lily's business loan." I was stunned. "What do you mean?" I asked. Dad's grin widened. "We withdrew your savings, $2,800,000. You should be proud. Your money is ensuring your sister's future." Mom chimed in, "You'd have squandered it anyway. You never understood the family's needs." I didn't react with anger or tears. I just stared at them, two people who had turned manipulation into a fine-tuned skill. That morning, I learned that while blood might be thicker than water, greed was thicker than both. They misinterpreted my silence as defeat. Dad poured himself a drink and started boasting about how family sacrifices built a legacy. Mom rambled on about how money could be regained, but reputation was irreplaceable. I just smiled because what they took was not my real savings. It was a decoy account I'd set up 4 years ago. It was with the same bank, followed the same transaction patterns, but the funds went to a different destination. The money they stole was traceable, pre-flagged, and legal bait. The moment they touched it, they stepped into an audit trap. I stood up, poured myself a glass of wine, and calmly said, "Happy birthday to me." They laughed, thinking I'd finally lost it. But inside, I was counting down. In exactly 72 hours, the bank and the financial regulatory authorities would be on their case, and this time, I wouldn't lift a finger to help. 3 days later, the situation started to unravel. I was sipping my morning coffee when Dad's blocked number flashed on my phone. I answered slowly. "What did you do?" He roared. "The bank has frozen all our accounts. They're talking about an investigation." I leaned back in my chair, watching the sunlight dance on the floor. "Oh, that? I got an email about a fraud alert too." "Don't play dumb, Connie," he shouted. "They think we've been laundering money." I smiled to myself. Strange. Maybe they should ask who made the transfers. Behind him, Mom's voice came through the line. "Connie, fix this right now. You're ruining our reputation. Lily is in a mess." I took a sip of coffee. "You mean the one whose future my money secured?" There was a beautiful silence on the other end. Dad finally mumbled, "You'll regret this. We're family." I chuckled. Exactly. That's why I left clues for the auditors so that the family gets full credit for their crimes. They started shouting over each other, their panic palpable. I hung up, exhaled, and texted my lawyer. "They've accessed the flagged account. Time to proceed." My lawyer replied instantly. "Perfect. Stay put. We'll let the authorities handle it." I spent that afternoon at my office, finalizing a proposal for my own tech startup, the one my parents said would never make money. As my phone kept buzzing with their chaos, I smiled quietly. For 12 years, they thought they were draining my life. But every deposit, every number, every file name had led them straight into a trap they'd built themselves. This was the birthday gift I'd waited a long time to unwrap. By the next morning, their panic had turned into desperation. Mom showed up at my apartment unannounced. Her hair was a mess, and the smell of her perfume couldn't cover the stench of anxiety. She banged on the door like a debt collector, shouting my name so loudly that the neighbors peeked out. When I opened the door, she stormed in. "Connie, you have to fix this," she pleaded, pacing back and forth. The investigators came to the house. They asked about wire transfers and offshore accounts. Your father almost fainted. I leaned against the counter, calm as ever. I told you not to touch what wasn't yours. She turned to me, her eyes glistening, her tone sharp. We're your parents. We raised you. Everything we did was for your future. For my future? I asked. Or for the future you couldn't control? Her lips trembled. You can't do this to your sister. She's innocent. I sighed. You mean Lily, the future business tycoon who registered a shell company with Dad's name last month? Don't insult me, Mom. I work in data security. She froze. You knew? I knew everything. The fake invoices, the unauthorized withdrawals, even the calls to your banker friend in Miami. You both underestimated me because I kept quiet. She dropped onto the couch, her face as pale as a sheet. You set us up. I shook my head. No. You set yourselves up. I just stopped saving you from the consequences. Her voice cracked. Connie, please. We could lose everything. I looked her in the eye. You already have. The moment you treated me like an ATM instead of your daughter. She started to cry, but I didn't flinch. For the first time in years, the guilt wasn't mine. The silence between us felt like freedom. By evening, the story hit the news. It wasn't on the front page yet, but it was enough to make them sweat. A small headline read, "Local couple under investigation for financial irregularities." The photo below showed my parents outside their home, looking furious and terrified. I watched the report from my apartment, eating pizza, feeling a strange sense of release. 12 years of manipulation were finally collapsing under their own weight. My phone rang again. It was Lily. Her voice cracked before she even said hello. Connie, what did you do? Mom is a wreck. Dad is talking to lawyers. You have to help us. I already did, I said softly. I told the truth. You could have just talked to us, she cried. Like the way you talked to me when you stole my savings with them? I asked. She fell silent. You knew, Lily. Don't pretend you didn't. You signed the transfer authorization. Her breathing quickened. They said you'd never notice. I noticed, I said. I always notice. I just waited until the lesson would cost enough to matter. I heard her start to cry. For a second, my chest ached. Not for her innocence, but for how far she'd strayed trying to please them. Please, she whispered. What happens now? I glanced at the TV, where the reporter mentioned pending audits and potential indictments. Now, I said. Now you all live with what you've built, just like I did. She hung up. I finished my pizza, closed my laptop, and stared out at the city skyline. For years, I'd been cleaning up their mess in the shadows. Now, I was done. They could drown in their own chaos and call it family. 2 days later, Dad called from a blocked number. His voice was hoarse, as if he'd aged 20 years overnight. Connie, listen. We need to talk in private. They've frozen all our assets, the cars, the accounts, and even the house is under review. I leaned against the window, watching the city lights twinkle. I told you not to touch what wasn't yours, Dad. His breath shuddered. They say you triggered this. You flagged the account yourself. Technically, I said, smiling, the AI fraud detection system I developed for my company did it. I just fed it the right data. There was a moment of silence, then a low laugh that sounded half admiration, half defeat. You really set us up, didn't you? I didn't set you up, I replied softly. I set myself free. He hung up without another word. That night, I sat on my balcony as a winter storm rolled in. The howling wind was like justice finally arriving. My phone buzzed with a text from Lily. They've lost everything. Mom blames you. Dad barely speaks. Are you happy now? I stared at the screen and typed back, no. Just at peace. I deleted her number after sending the message. When the storm finally subsided, I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't haunted by them anymore. I wasn't the broken daughter they'd created, I was the strong woman they'd inadvertently built, resilient, strategic, and unstoppable. As months passed, their trial became local gossip. Colleagues, old neighbors, and distant relatives who once idolized them started reaching out to me. The daughter they'd dismissed as too naive and emotional was now a successful entrepreneur. One afternoon, my assistant told me there was someone in the lobby claiming to be my sister. I froze. Lily. When I walked out, she stood there, thinner and paler, clutching a cheap bag and an apology in her eyes. Connie, she whispered, I didn't know they'd go this far. I just wanted to fit in. I studied her face, the same girl who once laughed when Dad called me a failure. Are they okay? I asked quietly. Mom is under house arrest, she said. Dad is trying to negotiate a plea deal. Then her eyes filled with tears. I've lost everything, Connie. Can you help me? The question hung in the air, heavy with irony. I handed her a business card. Not mine, but my charity. This program helps women start over. No strings attached, no family names. Apply there. She looked at it, trembling. You won't even talk to me? I smiled softly. I just did. And as I walked back to my office, I didn't look back. A year later, the past no longer haunted me. It had faded away. The trial ended with quiet sentences and valuable lessons. My parents lost everything, but the world moved on, and so did I. On the anniversary of it all, I drove to the beach. The air smelled of salt and forgiveness. I stood where I'd once sat on Dad's shoulders, the waves lapping at my feet. In my hand, I held a faded photo of us from that time. I forgive you, I whispered, knowing they'd never hear it. Maybe forgiveness was for me, not for them. When I got home, a package was waiting on my doorstep. No return address. Inside was a note from Lily. Thank you. The charity approved me. I'm rebuilding. For the first time in years, I smiled without bitterness. I placed the note beside my desk, under a frame that read, Legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you build. As the sun set beyond the skyline, my phone buzzed with an email from a national magazine. We'd love to feature your story, from estrangement to empowerment. I stared at it for a long time, then typed my reply. Only if we talk about rebuilding, not revenge. Because revenge was never the end, it was just a mirror that showed me who I'd become. And as I turned off the lights that night, I knew I had peace.